What is going on, Pro EDU community? It's Dustin Volkema, and today we're talking about the process that I use to set up image overlays in Cinema 4D for things like photo composites and possibly designing around print and copy if you're building ads, things of that nature, so that you know exactly where you need to place elements in your scene. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first things first, you're going to want to make sure that you have a PNG image to bring into Cinema 4D. So huge thanks to Nicole York for supplying this image. This is from a photo composite that we worked on together. And this one here is pretty simple. I actually just used the remove background operation here on the original photo to just go through and create a quick cutout. Now this is something that I would go through and polish quite a bit once I got to post in the compositing side of it, but I guess it's really important to know that you don't have to make this super complicated and spend all of the time masking and doing all of the detailed work on the front end. Right now, we're just getting something that we can use into Cinema 4D and start building the creative side of this rather than the technical retouching and masking side. So with that being said, just save out a PNG image and go ahead and open Cinema 4D. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D with the scene that I have built out here for this model. That's not really the part of the tutorial, but how I get the image overlay is actually quite a very simple process. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is click into your render settings, make sure that your output width and height are the same and they match the photo size that you're using. So in this case, I usually just jot those down and I keep them on one of my sticky notes here so that I can easily copy them into these fields. Just make sure that it's the same image resolution that you're using. Go ahead and close that out. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and create a Cinema 4D foreground object. This is what's going to allow our image to be displayed on the foreground on top of everything else. Now, next we'll head down to the material manager here at the bottom left. We can double click to create a new Cinema 4D material, and then we can go ahead and just rename this material subject and go ahead and double click so that we can open up our material editor. Now, I'm using Octane for this. Octane is still going to read this material and work very well with it, so we don't have to worry too much about that. Now, once we have the material editor open, let's go ahead and turn off reflectance just in case. I don't really like to keep reflectance on because it's not something that we need reflections on, and there are other ways that we'll talk about in other videos that I use this now and then. So in our color slot here, what we're going to do is load in our PNG, and what you can actually do is just drag your image straight into the texture slot here, and that's going to work well for us. Let's close that out. Now, after this is done, if we go ahead and drag this directly onto our foreground object, you'll see that we have the image here, but we're not really pulling the alpha channel from that PNG. So what we're going to do here is go ahead and click this little arrow for the drop down here on our texture slot. We'll head down to copy shader. Down in the alpha tab here, we can check the alpha. And then what we'll do is click this same little arrow here and then paste shader. So now we have our image there. So this is already going to set it up. So we're using the image alpha, and now we can see that our subject is in Cinema 4D and it's working just fine, but it's blurry. So the way that we can fix this, now this is really good for preview purposes. Sometimes I change this, sometimes I don't. But the way to fix this is to head down to viewport here, and we can see our texture preview size. So what we'll do is go ahead and change from default, and we can change this to any of these other parameters. Maybe I'll use 2048 by 2048, clears it up quite a bit, makes it really nice to use. So this is how it looks all set up here. And from this point, you can go ahead and just start to work around with your camera, and you can set your subject in your scene. I already have the camera set up here that I used for this specific render. Now, what we'll do is talk about some of the other things that I do very briefly when I'm setting up photo composites. So the first thing is a shadow dummy, or my former student slash friend now, Ash Morrell, calls it the Tic Tac Man. So what this is just setting up a very rough base. Let's go ahead and hide that foreground object for a minute. Is setting up a very rough, basic, primitive shape that is going to be casting shadows in your scene. I'm using Octane here, so then I put an Octane object tag on this, and I have my visibility set to camera visibility off, and that allows me to still catch the shadows and capture that detail without having this Tic Tac Man scene in the final render. So if I go ahead here and I'll change to my other layout for Octane, what we're going to want to do here, let's go ahead and make sure that that's not weird and glitchy. What we're going to make sure that we do here is actually lock our resolution in the Octane Live Viewer. So this is very crucial, because if you for any reason happen to have this unchecked, it can just make Octane a bit unstable, and so you want to make sure that this is checked. And we can go ahead and make our foreground object visible again, and we can start a render here. Now I don't have materials in here, I just have some basic lighting at this point, but this is what we're going to get. So now we have our subject in our environment. We have the Tic Tac Man here that we can see is casting shadows here on the various elements that are in the scene. And it gives us a good base for what we would be doing in post in Photoshop. So if I go ahead and I just hide this dummy here a minute so we can get rid of those shadows, we can see now that everything looks flat. We'd have to paint a whole lot of shadows in Photoshop, and this is done just a little bit faster by taking an extra 5 minutes, setting up the Tic Tac Man, making him invisible to camera, and he just has those shadows casted in a very easy to work with way once we get to post. So it's that simple. It's actually a really quick way to create an easy overlay. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. You can always go through, like I did in this one here specifically, do a very quick cutout in Photoshop, export that PNG, make sure that your resolution in Cinema 4D matches the resolution of your photo so you don't get any weird type of stretching or squashing of your image. Now, creating the Cinema 4D foreground object, Cinema 4D material, copying your PNG image into the color channel texture slot, disabling reflectance, and then copying that down into, or pasting that texture down into your image alpha is a very simple process, and it works really well. Now, there are other ways that we can go about doing this that we'll talk about in other videos. We'll save that for another time. So that's all for today, guys. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, never stop learning, and I'll see you guys in the next video.